Welcome to Searching for the Question Live. My name is David Orban, and I am very happy to be sharing with you once again a conversation about technology, the implications on society, and how the world around us is rapidly changing not only at an accelerating rate, but at a rate of acceleration that itself is increasing, what I call through the jolting technologies. Today's guest is Brett King, and I am happy to have him back. He was actually on the show about a year ago, and the opportunity and the occasion to have him back is the release of his latest book. So without further ado, Brett,
Hey, David.
welcome to Searching for the Question Live.
I'm still searching for the answer, actually, but thank you for having me.
Well, and you can have a lot of answers. Some of them may be replies to questions that come up. I am very happy to find interesting questions as well. I believe they are wonderful door openers.
Absolutely.
Now, before we go and talk about the themes and the rich implications of the lines of reasoning that you are exploring in your book, what is the cardinal number here? How many have you written before?
Oh, this is technically my 6th hardcover, my 7th book, because I did an ebook only release. So
Right.
yeah, it's quite a growing book catalog, I guess, right?
That's right. That's right. You have a lot of books in you have had a lot of books in you.
I
All
think
right.
once I wrote the first one, and thankfully it was quite successful, it led me down a path of really doubling down on that strategy, and it's been delightful. I have to say, it's been. I feel very honored and gifted to have had over the last decade or so the opportunity to do this, and I feel like I'm getting better as a writer. So I feel like the quality of the books are improving. At least I hope so.
So my copy didn't arrive yet, so I
It will.
haven't had the chance of reading it. There you go. There you go. Techno Socialism. Well, certainly a provocative title already. Why don't we start there? What is
Sure.
Techno Socialism?
So we explored various ways to talk about this, but ultimately the theme is using technology to better cater for the needs of individuals and citizens on the planet. So things that would have typically been called socialism, like providing for the basic needs of citizens, housing, healthcare, food, education, and so forth. Previously, we would debate who's going to pay for this. So we proposed that technology, through high levels of automation in society and government, will reduce the cost of these services. So there's no longer any argument over the economy being able to support these basic needs. So you could call it techno-humanism, techno-collectivism. It's really talking about gearing the economy first and foremost to the needs of citizens before we look at metrics like economic growth.
Yeah, let's break the title in two, starting from the second part. A given percentage of our viewers will be from the United States of America, where for a lot of people, not only on the right, but including some on the left, talking about socialism has a negative connotations. One, why do you think that is the case? Why it shouldn't be, if it shouldn't be, and how could the U.S. overcome the bias against the term and the implications?
We make fairly clear at the start of the book that we are not talking about socialism, your grandfather's socialism. We're not talking about the political movement. What we're talking about is social issues that need to be solved. And in classic terms, if you talk about something like universal basic income, for example, in classic terms, this is untenable for those on the right from an economics perspective. Who's going to pay for it? The market can't support this, and so, let's dismiss it. And so, that if you look at mechanisms that are closer to socialism in terms of the collective good, workers owning the means of production and so forth, there's clear ideological barriers to that in the United States based on the firm belief that capitalism is the solution to the prosperity of the economy. But we argue in the book that capitalism needs reform. And the primary argument for that is the gross inequality that exists in the United States today. It's the worst inequality that the US has faced since its founding. Some would argue the worst inequality we've ever seen of any modern economy in history. And that is no longer sustainable either. So if we're going to fix inequality, we have to look at new ways of thinking about that. And the pandemic provided us with some inputs into that. The stimulus payments that were made when there was 40 million people registered for unemployment benefits in the United States as a result of the disruption to work from the pandemic and things like this. So on the political side, I would say very simply this: the book is unashamedly right-wing in terms of economics, but it is also unashamedly left-wing in terms of social causes. And normally those two things conflict, but the purpose of this book is to show that they don't have to in highly automated societies.
The traditional view of left-right division, progressive and conservative too, is probably something that doesn't correctly map anymore.
Correct.
On the intertwined issues and on how technology is changing the world. One of my theses when I published the Network Society Manifesto was actually that social change, the form of society as it needs to adapt in order to be in order to keep the right to exist even, doesn't come from some increased moral ambition for people to have become better than their ancestors in, I don't know, renouncing slavery, for example.
Right.
But it comes from a solid technological basis that makes that aspiration actionable and sustainable.
Correct.
Where, unfortunately, we are not better than our ancestors who were slave owners. Certainly, our culture is such that hopefully we have overcome racism, not only in practice, but as an ideology as well. But the reason that we don't aspire to own other human beings is not because we are better people, but because it is not even convenient. It is not leading to better outcomes. So what are some of the technological advances either already achieved or that are being achieved that you believe are at the basis of what this kind of new social or societal development is going to be made possible by?
Well, let me give you one example, which is healthcare. This is a contentious issue in the United States. The costs of healthcare have been rising consistently since the 1980s. We see in the United States that healthcare represents about 17% of GDP. In the rest of the OECD world, it tends to be around 8 to 10% of GDP. So the costs of the US healthcare system are almost twice the average of other OECD nations. But the outcomes in the US are not necessarily better given that increase in costs. They're often poorer. So when we look at the functional issues in the healthcare system that we need to address to be able to reduce the cost, there's some obvious targets. First of all, we have the diagnosis or diagnostics. About 40% of diagnoses in the United States in respect to healthcare outcomes are incorrect. So that's why you always ask for a second opinion. You've got a 1 in 2 chance effectively of getting the correct diagnosis to the symptoms of your condition. Secondly, about 40% of the costs in the current system in the United States are administrative costs because of the structural elements of the healthcare system here, particularly around private health. So that's those administrative costs could be radically improved by the use of robotic process automation, for example. Diagnostics could be radically improved by the use of artificial intelligence. In the field of oncology, for example, and certain aspects of MRI, CAT scan technology, X-ray technology, AI-assisted diagnosis is improving dramatically the outcomes there. Then you've got things like gene therapy, where we could actually hack your DNA, your genome, to remove diseases from your genome. We've got personalized medicine, targeted medicine. We've got improved biometrics and sensors that you could wear on your body or even ingested, and this data feed that sort of leads to health maintenance rather than dealing with crises. So you put all of that together and we could reduce the US healthcare system, we estimate, by about 70% of its cost today. So you could provide universal health care to every American for 30% of the cost of the current system, approximately between 2035 and 2040 is our target. So that's a very good example of where the technologies could have specific application to make a very contentious issue essentially a non-issue. Because most Americans support the call for better healthcare or more accessible healthcare. The only reason we haven't got it is the argument who's going to pay for it. So we've demonstrated that not only can we pay for it, we can make radical improvements on that front. So that's one good example.
Now, one of the themes that you mentioned in opening is how inequality today has increased to a point where it may become unsustainable. The Gini index, which is the measure of how unequal a society is, historically indicated a nation ready for revolution if the index is above 50%.
I don't know where in the United States. Is it 52?
Yeah, it is. Okay, there you go. So is the series of developments that you describe in the book naturally leading to lowering of inequality, or would it additionally require an intervention from the top down via additional taxes that would redistribute income or wealth?
Let me share a screen with you here, if that's okay.
Oh yeah,
because it'll be. Here we go. This I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, this is our 4 quadrants that we map out. These are the 4 possible timelines that we map out in the book. And so there's 2 basic axes here: inclusive versus exclusionary, or collective versus individual focused economies, and chaotic futures versus planned futures, or what you might typically call dystopian versus utopian. Right. So in this scenario, the United States is currently going towards this neo-feudalist state. This is where you bake in the inequality. We have a technological divide. The rich can, for example, access things like longevity treatments and things like that. But corporations really get to define policy and legal settings. So, the best illustration of that at the moment is if you look at COP26, of all the groups that attended COP26, the largest single group that was represented there were lobbying groups for fossil fuel companies. Right. And so fossil fuel corporations have set the agenda largely in respect to climate change. The whole debate over climate change obviously has been largely funded in that sense. And so that's, they're the 4 possible outcomes that we look at. Of those, you've also got ladder stand scenario where we reject technology and artificial intelligence, for example, or we just wait too long to respond to issues like AI and climate change, and we have a lot of failed states because the systems collapse. Obviously, we believe the better outcome is that of the Technosocialism scenario. So coming back to your question on inequality, one of the key issues there is the emergence of artificial intelligence and its integration into society. And I think what's lost in the conversation today about artificial intelligence and the debate over whether AI is going to, create more jobs than it destroys and all of that, is the fact if you look historically at the way we've thought about artificial intelligence and automation, we are designing AI for the very specific purpose of taking humans out of the labor force. That is the core purpose of artificial intelligence. And so whenever you talk about AI's integration into society, you need to deal with that problem. The fact that supply and demand economics no longer dictate labor participation. And that's a fundamental shift in the economy that is going to basically destroy our current view of economics in respect to the economy's ability to provide enough work and a living wage for enough people that the economy can function.
Well, so I disagree with the premise that the goal of AI is to replace humans in the labor participation. It is a consequence of AI for sure. The goal of AI is to make abundant a previously scarce resource, which is the availability of talented and potentially passionate minds able to ask interesting questions and pursue with either some or no help.
You're absolutely correct, David, right? And that's the key point of this. The work changes. The function of work in society changes. We now can pursue work that we're passionate about. We can pursue much bigger, grander goals like populating the solar system or, I don't know, resurrecting extinct species or whatever.
And then the second, well, not objection, but maybe enriching of what you stated there is that what is under profound tension and potentially complete disruption is not trivially the economy itself, but the relationship between economy and society as they should to flourishing, to human flourishing, which we call the social contract. And once again, especially in the United States, but in many other places as well, the social contract simply says if you work, it's fine. If not, you can go and die in a ditch.
Right.
And so that is what we have to reevaluate if we want AI as well as many other technologies to contribute to human well-being.
Exactly. Yeah, how we articulate that in the book is we say, what's the purpose of the economy? And economists would argue it's to create GDP growth, it's to, there's all these metrics, unemployment, to create full employment, to have good trade balances, to have solid market returns and market growth. These are typically the measures that economists may use. And by that measure, the post-Second World War economy of the United States is the most successful economy we've seen in history so far. But if you say, well, the economy should function in a way that it makes every citizen, looks after the needs of every citizen, and that it can support the life, liberty, and happiness of every citizen, then the US's economy, by the measure of inequality alone, is a demonstrable failure. And so it's balancing the social contract, as you say. Should the entire focus of the economy just be economic output when capitalism has already had some pretty significant failures? 8 to 10 million people die every year from air quality, pollution. Clearly climate change could be argued as a failure of capitalism in terms of correct priorities. Our ability to respond to the pandemic economically. The free market, didn't have the tools to do that. The government had to step in and supplement, activities and actions to ensure that, we minimized harm to the population. So it's that reprioritization where the economy first and foremost should look after all of the needs of the citizens, which becomes much more important when you have displacement of employment by technology and when you have climate change impact society, particularly with eco-refugees, food scarcity, and things like that are potential.
When 12 or 13 years ago, I was part of the team that designed Singularity University, where we study the impact of exponential technologies on society. I came to the conclusion that an unstoppable consequence of many of these independently was to lead towards decentralization, which is, for example, one of the reasons why, after publishing the Network Society Manifesto, the rise of Bitcoin wasn't as much of a shocking surprise as the fulfillment of something very well expected, at least on my side. Similarly to how digital manufacturing, peer-to-peer learning, and many other trends are becoming stronger and stronger, potentially disrupting the nation state from a different angle, not that from the technology support itself, but the organizational levers of whether, for example, regulators are able to create a level playing field for the various economic players to find what works best, what is the fittest solution in a given market, given certain technologies, and so on. Now, at face value, or at least as little as I know about the details of the arguments in your book right now, it would sound that what you expect is a strengthening of a centralized framework where the support systems are put in place, and whether desirable or undesirable, it doesn't even matter. The decision power of entities that are under the purvey of the nation state to seek alternative organizations to their needs is nullified. Is that what you see?
Yeah, well, it's a combination. There's certain elements of governance that's going to need to be coordinated across the planet, because it's just, for example, there's no such thing as a national climate change policy when it comes to climate change. Mm-hmm. If we don't act in accord across the planet, we won't solve the problem. So, there's a requirement for some form of centralization around what our objectives are, and in respect to how we spend money in attacking the problem. So, for example, one of the bold, proposals we have in the book is to forgive all national debt. But that national debt has to be dedicated over the next 30 years to climate mitigation and these broader social causes. How to manage that then becomes a mechanism of consensus building. So it's more decentralized in respect to the consensus building. So, for example, we talk about models like virtual Taiwan, which allows consensus building for domain experts to come together in respect to policy, and removes the sort of representative government element that can be biased or influenced, for example, in that scenario. But we also talk about cryptocurrencies and decentralization being extremely important mechanisms for creating new value systems that are going to be important for groups of people within society. So, for example, we might create carbon coins or something that are geared towards appreciation only when, we reach certain goals in respect to mitigating climate risks, like extracting carbon out of the atmosphere, or countries reaching their Paris Accord, Paris Agreement goals, and so forth. So there's both happening simultaneously. The one key thing we argue is that when it comes to things that affect the planet as a whole, or the human species as a whole, there needs to be consensus amongst governments and consensus amongst the governance process to make those things more effective. For example, artificial intelligence regulation. Today, if you use TikTok, you're using a Chinese AI. If you use Facebook, you're using an American AI. But the ethics behind those AIs just isn't regulated. And that needs to be something that's given, we think, global consideration. But when it comes to initiatives, for example, on for example, the coming eco-refugee crisis. We talk about 300 million to 1 billion eco-refugees that are going to be displaced through climate, food scarcity, and so forth. That is something that absolutely can be attacked from a decentralized position in respect to trying to solve that problem, with groups of people coming together, raising funds, building floating cities, or whatever the solution set that they may dream of. The reality is we're going to need all of that activity to tackle that problem. So, that's something that isn't improved by centralization, as an example.
Is the book prescriptive in the sense that a given government could take it and turn it into policy? And if yes, how would you rank from the more ready to the less ready on one axis, and the more those who would need it most and those who would need it least? Because, for example,
sure,
you could say, I don't know, New Zealand could be quite ready to take on whatever they are still missing, but as a matter of fact, they don't need it so much because a lot of what you are describing, they already implemented. Or there could be some South American government that needs it a lot, and they actually could be ready, even out of desperation, like El Salvador with Bitcoin, to make some radical change. But some big players like China or the US, where, for example, we talk about healthcare in the US, China is the same with the pension system, which is underfunded and doesn't cover a lot of the population, and there will be a lot of problems. They just gave up the one-child policy, realizing that they have a huge demographical time bomb ticking under them. So these two would need it a lot, but the likelihood that they will be able to heed your recommendations is potentially small.
Yeah, as an economy, China has many advantages. They're certainly much more geared towards being configured for the 21st century than, say, the United States in respect to skill sets, the basic building blocks of the economy that they're employing now, their infrastructure investment. They're investing 8% of GDP a year in infrastructure right now. In the US, we've seen how hard it is to get infrastructure.
As we are streaming this live,
exactly.
Some part of that infrastructure investment didn't seem to actually generate the returns that they were expecting, given that Evergrande stopped paying their loans, right?
Yes. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't challenges in the Chinese system, but let me share with you some of the policy statements or policy directives that we put. Now, we don't necessarily mandate or prescribe these, but we say these are the issues we'll have to resolve. So hopefully you can hang on, see that. Yep. So here, what we're basically talking about, I'll try and hone in on this a little bit so it's easier to see. We talk about policy issues we need to resolve during the 21st. Inequality, discrimination, racism, climate change, which includes crop failures, food and agriculture agility, sustainability, reuse, climate repair, mass migration, eco-refugees, AGI sentience, living with robots, intelligence augmentation, neural interfaces, transhumanism, AI regulation, smart infrastructure, cheap, clean, renewable energy sources, climate resilience, the digital realm, space exploration and colonization, healthcare and longevity, economies and workforce development, childcare, more women in the workforce, mature age labor force, and then political reform, right? US versus China economic competition, unemployment and UBI, immigration policy, and so forth, right? So we do tackle a lot of that, but what we also do at the conclusion of the book is, and I know the orientation of this is off, but we actually map out the various timelines, like the Ladistan scenario, the Faldistan scenario, the neo-feudalism scenario, and we put these inflection points. What is it that is going to sort of take us down these paths? So, for example, when China becomes the #1 economy, whether the US accepts this from a reality perspective or pushes back against that. Global protests against AI when unemployment starts to hit. A global tax regime, for example. These types of things. So we are prescriptive in the sense that we map out the various outcomes on policy decision making and show the potential of those policies in terms of creating negative outcomes versus what we say is optimal humanity, which is the roadmap for technosocialism. But we don't say, the objective of this document is to create a discussion piece, David.
The trajectories that you describe are necessarily a synthesis and an abstraction on something that in the physical world is unavoidably chaotic and noisy, and it is so hard to point the finger towards trends, especially in the early stages where the signal versus the noise of everything that is going on is still too weak. And then when a complex system takes a given trajectory, nudging it towards a more desirable state is extremely hard, exactly because of how complex it is and the intertwining and interacting pieces of it. What this means is that most countries or most societies where, for example, the EU is a supranational organization, and probably many policy advisors are now concentrating on the EU level rather than saying what France or Germany should be doing. It doesn't make sense anymore. So each of these, rather than ending up cleanly in one of the four quadrants, will be somewhere.
Or we could see all of those four quadrants simultaneously based on different systems. Yeah, absolutely.
And if they recognize that, for example, let's again say the US recognizes that it is leading or leaning towards this neo-feudalistic stasis where social mobility is eliminated, where entrenched interests run the risk of being dominant for generations, which, for example, has been the case of presidential elections, right?
Of course.
Where too often there is almost a monarchic succession with interchangeable chairs in the presidential seat. If there is a clear recognition, do you foresee it possible for a country to get out of the rut, to reposition itself, to move out of neo-feudalism, for example, as techno-socialism? And is it something that would take a few years or several decades?
It really depends, I think, on, this is a philosophical question more than anything else. And so I think when you look at the book, and we discuss some philosophy, Aristotle and Socrates, Plato, Thomas Jefferson, and so forth as part of the book. But, this basic philosophy, should the economy serve just a small group of people or the whole, is something we're going to be forced into dealing with as AI and climate hits, because it's going to affect everyone, but not everyone will have the economic resources to deal with that at an individual level. And so then the question will become, does the society we live in have that responsibility? Now, today, the argument is, no, that's not society's responsibility, that's the individual's responsibility in the United States, for example. But when it becomes clear that, people who are well educated, who have worked hard all of their life, now are displaced by an economy who has fundamentally new requirements from a labor skills perspective, and that they, no matter how hard they try, they can't actually change the sort of reshaping of the skill sets required in the economy. But there's a retraining process potentially that they could pursue. But it's so many people affected by this that ultimately that argument that it's an individual's responsibility, it becomes untenable. And so you either face a requirement to rethink the way the economy supports those people, such as universal basic income, or you have to deal with the disruption to social cohesion, including potentially revolution and so forth that comes from that. There is a point where the negative costs of doubling down on the current system are just too great. And so we anticipate that that's probably around 2035. We don't think, for example, that the United States will change without that sort of crisis moment, but other economies may. For example, Britain may find that actually a functioning, UK economy requires immigration at a much more significant level than they thought previously, and that that the dysfunction that we see in the economic system today may continue to get worse. For example, as the economy recovers and the supply chain just can't be supported by the skills just inherent within the nation, that you need that. As birth rates decline, countries are going to look for ways to stimulate growth. Immigration has obviously been one of those key methods that we've used in the past. In today, there does tend to be a tendency towards skilled immigration, but it may be that in the future, in an attempt to get faster growth in the economy, that any immigration becomes acceptable. That's one of the potential things we explore in the book as an example.
There is a top speed, a fastest rate that cannot be exceeded in genetics as you look at species that need to evolve, adapting to new conditions. And this actually determines the rate of not only change, but it determines the rate with which species will go extinct. Right. If their environment changes more rapidly, then they just even hard as they try, they just cannot evolve fast enough. Now, humans famously, at least in our world, are not bound by that speed because of all the technological accoutrements that help us adapt. Whether it is the fact that we wear other animals' fur in the Arctic, or we use spears and arrows to hunt rather than just running to catch our prey. Is this enough to be able to enact and absorb the degrees of changes that will be necessary to play out positive scenarios? Could there be a second order top speed where not only genetic but memetic adaptability hits a ceiling.
So one of the key problems humanity has, and we describe this in the book, is that a lot of people treat life like an Olympic competition, that there has to be winners and losers. And we've emphasized competition as a key measure that defines us as humans, that we were the fittest. Survival of the fittest as example is one of those, we have the rich versus the poor, the left versus the right. We create these arbitrary classifications of humans, our national boundaries, the piece of dirt that we were born on that makes us more intelligent or better looking or smarter. And so we've created this structure of division and competition around humanity. And so when you look at capitalism today, we've really honed that to a fine art. So it's competition at an individual level for resources and jobs. It's competition at a corporation level, at a national level. And that has been somewhat effective. But when you look at the most advancements that humanity have made, the period of the fastest technological advancements and the most incredible changes, you see human collaboration, the Human Genome Project, the Apollo project, how we responded to creating vaccines for coronavirus, the Great Wall of China, even, like the Second World War, when you have two sides, but the technological advances on both sides are incredibly amplified. So the best outcome for humans is that we learn to compete for the species, not counterintuitive in terms of, if you like, the evolution of the species or our best possible outcome. Because, we treat it like we're fighting against each other to win. But the reality is, if the species needs to survive these epic moments that are coming upon us, we need to work together. And that's how we frame that, what we'd really like to see the philosophy of the world change to be. That's a very real question, David. Can we change the philosophy that the human family is worth saving as a species, and the only way we really do that is together? That, I think, is ultimately essential. But it may be that some of humanity get that and they thrive and others don't, right? I just don't know the answer to that. I'm an optimist. I will say, yes, it's going to happen and we're going to be great and it's going to be phenomenal. We're going to explore the solar system and we're going to live forever, and all of these technological possibilities are there. But I'm also realistic that there are some significant challenges.
We will go back there, and we are live, so we are getting some kudos from Lorenzo.
Hey, thanks, Lorenzo.
These are world-changing questions, and he is liking the great content and the food for the mind. So, Lorenzo, I recommend you buy the book, right?
Rise of Technosocialism, available wherever good books are sold.
Yeah, I'm an optimist too, and it is a little bit genetic, I believe, as well as the easier choice, because when you are right, you are happy. A pessimist, when they are right, they are sad, right? So I prefer to be an optimist. But as you said, we also must be a realist. And as we talk about the rate of change that technology supports and unstoppably creates in society, what actually happens is that for those people who hit the limit of adaptability, the world becomes less and less intelligible.
Correct.
And with COVID, we saw that very vividly, where the people who say, hey, listen, something's fishy here, because I know that vaccines take 10 or 15 years to be developed. How is it possible that the vaccine is now developed in 6 months?
It's experimental.
Something is wrong here. And I'm a snob. So my first reaction is to completely ignore the discomfort those people feel. But at the same time, I don't want to be the next Hillary Clinton to label them despicable and then be shouted out of any venue that indeed I would like to interact with or address. And I think we have to take seriously at what degree the people who have become unable to interpret the world, our science fiction world, that has become almost magical to them, to the point that they resort to superstition in order to be able to make decisions. Well, they cannot be abandoned. They cannot be left behind. What can either individuals or nations that recognize this and want to bring those segments of population into a future they feel they can live with dignity, what can they do?
Well, you know, I mean, we explore this to some extent in respect to things like, you know, transhumanism, right?
Okay.
And so that's one area where we have potential for sort of a forking of humanity as certain people augment their intelligence or have access to better technologies. You know, we could have, you know, one segment of society make significant advances intellectually, or those that believe in the use of AI, those that don't, those that religiously can't get away from, you know, the concept of capitalism and those things when it comes to social order. And, you know, so we talk about how that should be honored, how those individuals should be honored in that space, and providing some dignity for natural humans, you know, versus augmented humans, I think is going to be the responsibility of those that have the technological advances or the higher order thinking in respect to this. You know, it comes back to the value, the core value of the species to some extent.
The radius of empathy has to include people who choose different lifestyles. If we pretended for those of a conservative outlook to accept a society where same-sex relationships are legal, and we fought for that, and now grudgingly they do, at least we hope so, well, they can and should also receive respect when they say, go ahead, plug anything in your brain, augment your cognition. I don't want to, but I still feel I must be part of society as we define it in the broadest possible terms.
Absolutely.
And it is also for kind of selfish reasons, because it is always, as with those charts that trace some development and as an accelerating phenomenon hits some arbitrary 100%, the chart stops. But the development never does. AI is gonna hit human level intelligence for a minute.
Yeah.
And then it will just keep going.
And then it's going to be,
know, it's not that 100% we believe is the best we can have, is for any reason something that AIs will respect as their endpoint.
Yes.
So it is going to be the case that an increasing number of active participants in building a technological future are going to be non-human, or at least as a traditional human is defined. So by understanding how the most diverse possible ways of living can be included in a complex and thriving society, we are hopefully setting the stage for us not being left behind, as much as we can try to augment our cognition or our understanding of the world.
And we should, again, as part of AI regulation, instill as best we can in that a respect for all humans, because if AIs learn that from us, then that should hopefully carry over. So again, I think that's why ethics become a very important framework for artificial intelligence. But again, this comes back to that discussion about what is the economy for? Should people be left out of the economy just because you disagree with their position, or because they can't conceptualize intellectually with the advancements that humanity is making? And the argument, I think, should be that the economy should be there to serve humanity, not the other way around, that humanity should serve the economy. We built the economy for the purpose of advancement and growth, yes, but ultimately, if it doesn't support the needs of us as humans, then we argue that's a failure, a logical failure.
One of the reasons why radical longevity and youthful lifespans of an arbitrary length are so attractive, at least to me, is because they extend and expand the potential for our creativity and
Same for me.
participation in seeking diverse solutions, running experiments, failing in them, and at that point, you can stand up and say, "Hey, 8 or 10 billion humans, we are here to work it out. We are here to seek what works, what is awesome, discard what is awful, and just explore the universe." And the better we can do that, with better tools, with better support, with better organization and coordination, the better off all of us are going to be, including our AI pals.
Absolutely. In fact, the way we talk about it in the book, or the way we explore it, I talk about Aristotle, as I've mentioned. And, Aristotle said of humanity that the purpose of humanity is to thrive. And we have shown our potential to do that, but we need to sort of realign that right now. That is, that we can only truly thrive as a species when we work together. That's truly my belief. And so the more consistently we can, or the more we can explore those values, educating ourselves, exploring the depths of science and physics and knowledge, and all of those elements become very critical. But the other element is sort of fairly simple, which is, if we want the best out of ourselves, then we need the room to move. We need the room to explore. We need the room to, like a lot of our time that we spend thinking today is just on process. It's on things that don't mean a lot at the end of the day for either ourselves or humanity. So by creating highly automated societies, it really does give us that freedom to explore the limits of humanity in a way that isn't possible in today's system. But we have to deal with the fact that getting to that point will destroy a lot of the sacred ideologies we have. Capitalism, economics, supply and demand, those sort of things.
We should eat and spit out dogmatic assumptions for breakfast, lunch,
Absolutely.
and dinner.
Amen.
Because they are useful for a limited amount of time, and they become a clutch and a burden most of the time. Brett, I am sure that your latest book, The Rise of Techno Socialism, is going to be very successful, and deservedly so.
Thank you, brother.
And I invite our viewers to catch it the soonest at launch. And I'm looking forward to more conversations around these themes together with you.
I'm looking forward finally, now that things are settling down, to seeing you again somewhere, David.
Oh,
Hopefully.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
much so. In
Let's
New
we
York
need
or in
dinner, and we
Bangkok
can discuss this at leisure.
at
Exactly.
one of our digs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today at Searching for the Question Live. And I will see you at the next episode.